On a barrier island in Palm Beach, Florida, stands a palace that was never meant to last, Mar-a-Lago. Its name means sea to lake in Spanish. 17 acres stretch from the Atlantic Ocean to the Lake Worth Lagoon. 126 rooms, 36,000 antique tiles. A house so vast that its creator required a staff of 60 simply to keep it running. Marjorie Merriweather Post built this estate in the 1920s, at a time when she was among the richest women in America. She filled it with treasures gathered from around the world. Within its walls, she welcomed presidents, diplomats, and royalty. She believed the house would endure forever. She was nearly wrong. After her death, the property passed from owner to owner, its purpose repeatedly altered, its future uncertain. The federal government rejected it as too costly. Potential buyers walked away. Demolition permits were approved. For a brief moment in 1985, wrecking crews stood ready to turn Marjorie Post's dream into rubble. That moment passed. The estate survived. This is the story of a house that refused to vanish. A story that begins long before architects drew plans or foundations were laid, before Post ever came to Florida. It begins with an accident, a Spanish cargo ship that never reached its destination, and a chain of events that transformed an uninhabited island into the winter capital of American wealth. To understand Mar-a-Lago, one must first understand the place that made it possible, a place that did not even have a proper name until 1878. On January 9, 1878, the Spanish brig Providencia, sailing from Havana to Barcelona, ran aground off the Florida coast. Its cargo, 20,000 coconuts packed tightly in the hold, spilled into the surf as the ship broke apart. The coconuts washed ashore on a barrier island locals called Lake Worth country. Only a handful of settlers lived there, scattered along the coastline in crude wooden structures. When the wreck was spotted, residents rushed to the shore, not to rescue the crew who had already abandoned ship, but to claim salvage rights. Coconuts were gathered by the cartload. Some were cracked open for their meat and milk. Most were planted. The coconut palm, though not native to Florida, thrived in the sandy soil and subtropical climate. Within a decade, groves lined the shoreline. The island's character changed. Dense scrub and tangled vegetation gave way to a landscape that felt unmistakably tropical. Visitors from the north took notice. The island needed a new name. Palm Beach seemed appropriate. The first permanent settlers had arrived in 1872, confronting a harsh environment. Summers were oppressive. Storms arrived without warning. The nearest substantial town lay more than 100 miles to the north. Supplies came by boat, when they came at all. Early pioneers cleared land by hand, carving out space for crops and rough shelters. They planted citrus and pineapples, fished the lagoon and the open ocean, and survived with difficulty. In 1880, the Coconut Grove House opened as the island's first hotel. It offered simple rooms and basic meals, catering to a small number of wealthy northerners willing to endure the journey south to escape winter. By 1920, the population hovered around 200. A church stood near the water. A post office managed mail that arrived sporadically. A settlement known as Sticks housed many of the black laborers who kept the community functioning. Palm Beach remained isolated, known only to adventurous tourists and the resilient few who lived there year-round. Everything changed in 1983. That spring, Henry Morrison Flagler arrived on the island. 63 years old and enormously wealthy from his partnership with John D. Rockefeller in Standard Oil, Flagler had recently completed the Ponce de Leon Hotel in St. Augustine. Its success proved that affluent Americans would travel to Florida if given sufficient incentive. Flagler spent days walking the narrow strip of land, studying the coral base beneath the sand, observing the calm lagoon on one side and the open Atlantic on the other. He saw not what Palm Beach was, a remote settlement with minimal infrastructure, but what it could become with enough money and vision. He began buying land immediately. Construction on the Royal Poinciana Hotel began in May 1893. Hundreds of workers were brought in. Materials arrived by barge and boat. The hotel would contain 1,100 rooms, becoming the largest wooden structure ever built. It was positioned on the lakefront, facing west toward the sunset. The scale of the project created immediate challenges. Workers needed housing. The hotel would require a massive staff. Guests would expect services the island could not provide. Flagler looked across Lake Worth to the empty mainland and made a decision that would shape the region permanently. He founded a new town, West Palm Beach, designed as a support community, housing workers, shops, and services necessary to sustain the luxury resort, all kept out of sight of guests enjoying their tropical retreat. The Royal Poinciana opened on February 11, 1894. The Florida East Coast Railway reached West Palm Beach the following month. For the first time, wealthy Northerners could travel south in private rail cars, stepping directly from train to hotel without encountering the rough frontier beyond. They came, and kept coming. Flagler expanded relentlessly. In 1896, he opened the Palm Beach Inn on the ocean side of the island, later renamed the Breakers, offering direct Atlantic access. A massive pier extended into the ocean, allowing steamships from Nassau, Havana, and Key West to dock with passengers and cargo. A winter season emerged, 8 to 12 weeks each year, when America's wealthiest families fled northern cold for Florida warmth. They did more than visit. They built homes, vast winter cottages rivaling the grand estates of Newport or the Berkshires. Flagler himself set the standard in 1902 with Whitehall, his 55-room residence. The Marble Palace declared that Palm Beach was no longer a frontier outpost. It was a destination for the nation's elite. The town incorporated in 1911. Wealthy residents sought control over their exclusive enclave. Social clubs formed with strict membership rules. Zoning laws were passed. A tropical version of American aristocracy emerged, complete with all its exclusions and hierarchies. By the early 1920s, Palm Beach had become the winter capital of American wealth. Addison Misner designed Mediterranean revival estates along the island. Worth Avenue attracted luxury retailers. The seasonal social calendar rivaled New York and Newport. The wilderness was gone, replaced by a carefully curated paradise for those who could afford it. The stage was set for something unprecedented, something that would eclipse everything that came before. The infrastructure existed. The elite had claimed the island. All that remained was someone with enough money, vision, and ambition to build a palace that would define Palm Beach forever. That person was about to arrive. On May 9, 1914, Marjorie Merriweather Post received devastating news. Her father, Charles William Post, had taken his own life at his California estate. Suffering from declining health and convinced he would not recover, he died at 59. Marjorie was 27. She inherited everything, $20 million in cash and assets, worth more than $500 million today, and control of a rapidly expanding food empire. C.W. Post had built his company from a barn in Battle Creek, Michigan. He began with Postum, a coffee substitute made from roasted wheat and molasses. Aggressive marketing and questionable health claims made it a success. Grape nuts followed, then Post Toasties. By the time of his death, the Postum Cereal Company was a household name. Marjorie was not unprepared. Her father had trained her from childhood. She attended board meetings at 10. She understood finance, manufacturing, and marketing before most girls her age finished school. Still, she was young, grieving, and living in a world where women faced legal and social barriers unimaginable to men. She could not even vote until 1920. Her first husband, Edward Bennett Close, had little interest in the cereal business. Married in 1905, they had 2 daughters, Adelaide and Eleanor. Close was a lawyer, content with Greenwich society and unambitious in business. The marriage unraveled. Marjorie needed a partner who understood power and strategy. She found one in Edward Francis Hutton. E.F. Hutton was a stockbroker and financier with sharp instincts and a tolerance for risk. When Marjorie divorced Close in 1919 and married Hutton the next year, she gained a strategist. Together, they transformed the Postum Company into a corporate giant. The company went public in 1922, with Marjorie retaining majority ownership. Hutton became chairman. They began acquiring brands. Jell-O in 1925, Walter Baker Chocolate in 1927, Maxwell House Coffee in 1928. Each purchase expanded the company's presence in American kitchens. The most consequential acquisition came from an unexpected moment at sea. While sailing off Massachusetts, their cook served a meal prepared from a goose that had been frozen for 6 months. Frozen food in 1929 was notoriously poor in quality, but this meal was exceptional. Clarence Birdseye had perfected flash freezing, preventing ice crystals from damaging texture and flavor. Marjorie immediately grasped its potential. Hutton hesitated. Freezers were expensive. Consumers were unfamiliar with frozen foods. The infrastructure barely existed. Marjorie persisted. She remembered her mother's endless hours canning food on the family farm. Any innovation that saved that labor, she believed, would succeed. They purchased Birdseye's General Seafood Corporation for $22 million in 1929. The Postum Cereal Company needed a new name. It became General Foods Corporation. Marjorie Merriweather Post was now one of the most powerful businesswomen in America. Yet wealth could not satisfy everything. She collected art and hosted charity events in her 54-room New York apartment. Her social life rivaled her business obligations. Each winter, she longed for escape. Her first Florida home was comfortable but insufficient for the scale of entertaining she envisioned. Palm Beach offered the answer. In 1923, she began searching for land, reportedly crawling through dense underbrush with her realtor. Most prime oceanfront property was already taken. She needed acreage and the right geography. She found 17 acres stretching from the Atlantic Ocean to the Lake Worth Lagoon, resting on solid coral, essential in hurricane-prone Florida. Now she needed architects. Marion Sims Wyeth, who had designed her earlier Palm Beach home, understood her tastes, but for this project, she wanted something theatrical. She turned to Joseph Urban, famed stage designer for the Metropolitan Opera and the Ziegfeld Follies. Wyeth would shape the structure, Urban would create the drama. Together, they would build a palace blending Spanish, Venetian, and Portuguese influences into a residence unlike anything Palm Beach had ever seen. The woman who transformed a cereal company into General Foods was about to construct the most expensive private home in American history. Construction would begin within months. In the spring of 1923, Marjorie Merriweather Post stood on 17 acres of untamed Florida scrub and outlined her vision to the 2 men she had chosen to bring it to life. The architect and the designer listened closely. This project would surpass anything either had attempted before. Marion Sims Wyeth began drawing plans at once. The house would take the shape of a great crescent embracing a central courtyard. The main structure would rise 2 stories, with lower wings extending outward to contain service areas and guest rooms. At the center, a tower soaring more than 70 feet would command sweeping views across the island.
Urban concentrated on materials and visual impact. He imagined stucco walls, red tile roofs, sweeping arches, and shaded lodges that blurred the line between indoors and out. The style would evoke the Mediterranean, but its scale and ambition would be unmistakably American. Their partnership worked because each man understood his purpose. Wyeth focused on structure, the floor plan, the connections between wings, and the engineering required to withstand Florida's hurricanes. Urban took that framework and transformed it into spectacle, selecting materials and decorative details designed to arrest attention. Construction began in the fall of 1923, and the site quickly became a hive of activity. Post had authorized whatever labor was required. Hundreds of men arrived seeking work. The foundation posed a challenge. Palm Beach rested on coral rock, strong enough to support the building but difficult to excavate. Crews used dynamite to break through the toughest sections, hauling away rubble before pouring concrete. The entire first floor would be anchored directly into the coral base. Post had made one thing clear: she wanted the finest materials available, regardless of cost or distance. Urban took her at her word. 3 shiploads of Dorian stone were sent from Genoa, Italy to Palm Beach. The fossil-rich limestone appealed to Post because it aged quickly, developing a weathered surface that made new construction appear centuries old. Once the stone arrived, masons carved it on site, shaping arches and decorative details according to Urban's increasingly elaborate plans. The interior promised even greater drama. Post had acquired an extraordinary collection of antique tiles, approximately 36,000 pieces, some centuries old. They had belonged to the Havenmeyer family, sugar magnates who had assembled the collection over decades. Post purchased the entire trove and arranged its transport to Florida. Each tile was unique. Some carried geometric designs, others floral motifs or pictorial scenes. Installing them required skilled craftsmen capable of arranging irregular, historic ceramics into cohesive floors. Other materials arrived from equally distant origins. Black and white marble flooring came from a Cuban castle. Venetian silk was chosen to line select walls. Heavy carved wooden beams in the Spanish style supported ceilings throughout the house. At its peak, the project employed hundreds of workers, most commuting daily from West Palm Beach and laboring long hours in punishing heat. Post ensured meals were provided on site. She had no intention of allowing hunger to slow the construction of her estate. Across Palm Beach, residents watched as the house took shape. Walls rose steadily. The tower emerged. Red tile roofs spread across the sweeping crescent. Even Whitehall, Henry Flagler's marble palace, seemed modest by comparison. As 1924 gave way to 1925 and then 1926, the building revealed its final form. The crescent embraced the courtyard exactly as planned. The tower offered commanding views in every direction. The Dorian stone had already begun to weather, lending the illusion of age. Urban's sense of drama shaped every interior. The living room would span more than 1,800 square feet, with ceilings soaring over 40 feet high. Gold leaf accented decorative elements throughout the house. Urban designed a ballroom large enough to hold hundreds, complete with space for an orchestra and dancing. Each room possessed its own atmosphere and identity. Construction continued despite hurricanes and delays. Tropical storms disrupted shipments. Summer heat wore down crews. Post visited frequently, reviewing progress and deciding details most owners would have left entirely to others. By late 1926, completion neared. Chandeliers were installed. Decorative plasterwork received its final touches. Tiles gleamed. Marble floors reflected sunlight from windows designed to capture light at precise times of day. The final cost exceeded $7 million, well over $100 million in today's terms. At the time, it was reportedly the most expensive private residence ever built in the United States, outside of royal estates. In January 1927,
Mar-a-Lago anchored Marjorie Post's winters for decades, but her life extended far beyond Palm Beach. One chapter took her somewhere entirely unexpected. In December 1935, she married Joseph Davies, a prominent Washington lawyer with connections at the highest levels of government. He had known Franklin Roosevelt since the Wilson administration. When Roosevelt needed someone for a delicate diplomatic post, Davies was a logical choice. In August 1936, the president telephoned Davies at the Adirondacks and asked if he would consider becoming an ambassador. Davies replied that he preferred either Russia or Germany. The German position was filled. The Soviet Union was available. Davies took the oath in November. 2 months later, he sailed for Europe with Marjorie and his daughter, Eleanor. They arrived in Moscow in early 1937. Spaso House, the American ambassador's residence, became their home for the next 18 months. Post entered a world unlike anything she had known. Stalin's Soviet Union was filled with contradictions. The state proclaimed equality, while millions lived in hardship. Show trials condemned former revolutionaries. The secret police monitored everyone, including foreign diplomats. At Spaso House, the staff reported to Soviet intelligence, and hidden microphones recorded private conversations. Still, the role of an ambassador's wife remained constant. Diplomacy required entertaining, and entertaining required Marjorie Post. She turned Spaso House into a showcase of American hospitality. Formal dinners brought together Soviet officials and American diplomats who otherwise rarely interacted. Post supervised every detail: flowers, menus, seating. American products appeared on the table, quietly advertising the system her guests officially rejected. She also discovered Russian art. The Soviet government, desperate for foreign currency, sold treasures seized after the revolution. Imperial porcelain, Fabergé eggs, icons, and palace furnishings flooded the market. Post recognized both their value and their vulnerability. She purchased extensively, preserving objects that might otherwise have been scattered or destroyed. By the time she finished, she had assembled the finest collection of Russian imperial art outside the Soviet Union. Davies was transferred to Belgium in 1938. War followed soon after. His book, Mission to Moscow, became a bestseller and later a film, in which Anne Harding portrayed Post. The marriage ended in 1955. Post kept the art. Her Russian collection eventually found a permanent home at Hillwood, her Washington estate, where it remains today. Post never considered herself a diplomat. She believed she was simply doing what she had always done: hosting, collecting, preserving beauty. That these efforts also served American foreign policy was almost incidental. In Moscow, under constant surveillance and amid political terror, Marjorie Merriweather Post proved that her talents extended far beyond Palm Beach. She could do the same work anywhere, even in the most hostile environment imaginable. In the late 1960s, Marjorie Merriweather Post began planning for the end of her life, not out of morbidity, but practicality. She was in her 80s, her health was failing, and the fate of her 3 vast estates required decisions. Hillwood in Washington would become a museum for her art collection. Camp Topridge in the Adirondacks could be transferred to New York State. But Mar-a-Lago posed a different challenge. No single family could afford to operate it. Staffing, maintenance, utilities, and repairs cost more than $1 million a year. Post's daughters had lives of their own and no desire to manage a massive Palm Beach estate. Demolition crossed her mind. Many grand mansions from the 1920s had already been torn down. The land alone, 17 acres of oceanfront property, was enormously valuable. Developers would pay handsomely. But destroying a house that had taken 4 years to build felt like erasing her own life's work. Another possibility emerged. The federal government already maintained presidential retreats such as Camp David and Blair House. Why not a winter White House in Florida? A place where presidents could host foreign leaders in a setting that reflected American success and prosperity. Mar-a-Lago could accommodate large diplomatic gatherings. The location offered privacy and warm weather. The architecture projected the image Post believed the nation should present to the world. The donation was structured carefully. Upon her death, Mar-a-Lago would transfer to the National Park Service. A trust fund providing $100,000 annually would help offset maintenance costs. Congress approved the gift in 1972, and President Richard Nixon signed the acceptance legislation. Post received the recognition she sought. She died on September 12, 1973, at the age of 86. As planned, Mar-a-Lago transferred to government ownership. Problems surfaced almost immediately. Nixon already had a Florida retreat in Key Biscayne and had no need for another. He visited Mar-a-Lago only once in 1974. Watergate soon consumed the remainder of his presidency. Gerald Ford preferred Colorado ski slopes to Florida beaches. The house remained empty. The Carter administration evaluated the property seriously. Staff toured the estate and reviewed its requirements. The conclusions were grim. The trust fund covered barely 10% of the actual operating costs. Taxpayers would be responsible for the remainder indefinitely. Security concerns added further complications. A public road ran nearby. Palm Beach International Airport produced constant air traffic. Protecting a president at the site would require costly infrastructure that did not exist. Carter's team recommended returning the property. Congress debated through 1979 and 1980. In December 1980, legislation transferred Mar-a-Lago back to the Post Foundation. Government ownership had lasted 7 years. No president had ever spent a night there. The foundation now faced the same realities that had driven Post's original decision. Costs remained high. The trust fund was insufficient. The daughters, including actress Dina Merrill, had no interest in assuming responsibility. Mar-a-Lago was listed for sale at $20 million. Buyers did not appear. The mansion was too large for private use, and operating expenses frightened anyone who examined the numbers. The real estate market softened. Several deals collapsed before closing. With limited staff, the property deteriorated. Paint peeled, gardens grew wild. Landscaping once maintained with precision became overgrown jungle. A house that had hosted royalty now sat largely empty, visited only by caretakers and the occasional buyer who inevitably walked away. By February 1985, the foundation reached a decision. Mar-a-Lago would be demolished. The land would be subdivided and sold. Imported stone, antique tiles, gold leaf ceilings, everything Post had created would disappear. Permits were filed. The outcome seemed inevitable. Then, a New York real estate developer made a phone call.
Donald Trump first noticed Mar-a-Lago while vacationing in Florida in 1982. The estate immediately stood out. 17 acres stretching from the Atlantic Ocean to Lake Worth Lagoon, crowned by a Mediterranean-style mansion. The property was listed at $20 million. Nothing else on the Florida coast combined land, location, and architecture in this way. Trump was 39. Trump Tower was rising in Manhattan, cementing his reputation for ambitious projects. Florida was unfamiliar territory, but this property was impossible to ignore. He offered $15 million. The foundation rejected it outright. Other buyers expressed interest. Several signed contracts. Financing failed. Inspections revealed costly repairs. Each deal collapsed.
As the market weakened through 1983 and 1984, the mansion remained unsold. Trump waited. Rather than raise his offer, he pursued leverage. A narrow strip of beachfront land sat between Mar-a-Lago and the ocean. It belonged to Jack Massey, whose fortune came from building Kentucky Fried Chicken into a national chain. Trump paid $2 million for the parcel and announced plans to build a house there, one that would block Mar-a-Lago's ocean views. The threat was clear. The estate's most celebrated feature, its uninterrupted Atlantic panorama, would vanish. Selling to Trump at a reduced price was painful. Allowing him to destroy the views while the property remained unsold was worse. Negotiations resumed under pressure. Trump also understood the value of what lay inside the mansion. The rooms held antique furniture, carpets, porcelain, and decorative objects collected by Post over decades. Appraisers valued the contents at roughly $8 million. In December 1985, both sides signed an agreement. Trump later wrote that he paid $5 million for the property and $3 million for the furnishings. Contemporary reports cited figures closer to $10 million total. Whatever the exact number, the outcome was clear. Trump acquired Mar-a-Lago for roughly half its listed price. Ivana Trump immediately took charge of restoration. Roofs were repaired, mechanical systems replaced, gardens were reclaimed from overgrowth. The work took months and cost millions beyond the purchase price. When the house reopened, it filled with guests again. Business associates and celebrities gathered in rooms once used by diplomats and royalty. Trump had paid a fraction of the modern replacement cost for a property that zoning laws would never allow to be rebuilt. Where others saw only expense, he saw opportunity. By 1990, Trump's finances were under strain. Casinos were losing money. The real estate market had softened. Mar-a-Lago itself cost more than $3 million a year to maintain. The expenses never stopped. Trump proposed subdividing the land. The town council rejected the idea. The estate's historic status and nearby residents ensured opposition. He needed another solution. In 1993, a compromise emerged. Trump could convert Mar-a-Lago into a private membership club. He would preserve the house and grounds. In return, the town allowed limited commercial use. The Mar-a-Lago Club opened in 1995. Initiation fees began at $25,000 with annual dues on top. Membership was capped. But what set the club apart was not just luxury, it was access. While other Palm Beach clubs quietly excluded Jews, African Americans, and gay couples, Mar-a-Lago did not. Trump welcomed members regardless of background. Whether this reflected principle or business calculation was debated. The result was undeniable. Demand surged. Revenue stabilized the property. By the late 1990s, initiation fees had risen dramatically. The estate that once drained money now generated millions annually. Trump retained private quarters while the rest of the property thrived as a club. Concerts, charity galas, and major events returned. Mar-a-Lago had found a sustainable future. Years of neglect had dulled Mar-a-Lago's original splendor. Gold leaf faded, murals dimmed. Restoration required specialized expertise. Richard Haynes became artist in residence. His father had been Post's chief gilder. Using 23-karat gold, he restored ceilings, sculptures, and decorative elements. Interior decorator Buffy Donlin oversaw preservation. The goal was respect for Post's vision, not reinvention. The work earned recognition in 1998 from the Florida Trust for Historic Preservation. Later, Trump added a new ballroom modeled after Versailles. Completed in 2005, the Donald J. Trump Grand Ballroom doubled the original ballroom size. Gold leaf alone cost millions.
The space hosted the largest events in Palm Beach, including the International Red Cross Ball and Trump's own wedding. The style differed from Post's, but the purpose remained the same: to impress. Marjorie Merriweather Post believed wealth carried responsibility. From early adulthood, she gave generously. During World War I, she funded a military hospital in France, earning the Legion of Honor. She supported the Red Cross not only with money, but with time and leadership. The Salvation Army, Boy Scouts, and National Symphony Orchestra all benefited from her generosity. She funded free concerts for children, supported the future Kennedy Center, and quietly helped individuals in need. During the Great Depression, she organized large-scale fundraising efforts when suffering was widespread. Post understood that her wealth was not merely hers, it was a stewardship. Mansions and jewels drew attention, but hospitals, music, and relief efforts mattered more. In the end, what she gave away defined her legacy more than what she kept.